A hush fell over the opulent department store as the billionaire stood by, an unseen observer to a quiet tragedy unfolding at the checkout. A young girl, her face etched with disappointment, was being forced to return a birthday cake, the sole desire of her little brother. But the billionaire's intervention was imminent, a move that would ripple through their lives like a stone dropped in still water, altering their course forever. A paltry sum, yet it represented the entirety of a young boy's dreams. Emily, her brow furrowed in concentration, meticulously counted the crumpled bills in her hand. The weight of the world pressed down on her small shoulders as she realized she was short. The cashier, a woman hardened by years of retail monotony, tapped her foot impatiently. Behind Emily, a line of shoppers snaked through the aisle, their collective sighs adding to her mounting humiliation. With quiet dignity, Emily made her decision. "I'm sorry, I thought I had enough," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She reluctantly slid the blue rocket ship cake, a confection her brother had yearned for, back across the counter. A forced smile played on her lips, masking the crushing defeat she felt inside. She believed her silent struggle went unnoticed amidst the hustle and bustle, but she was wrong. Robert Sullivan, a man whose wealth rivaled small nations, watched from the periphery, his eyes sharp and perceptive. He was about to step into their lives, a catalyst for change neither of them could have foreseen. The cake's price tag read $12.50, but the true cost of leaving it behind was immeasurable. 12-year-old Emily stood transfixed, her small hand clutching a wad of crumpled bills that fell short of the required amount. She glanced at her little brother, his eyes wide with hopeful anticipation, and felt the crushing weight of responsibility pressing down on her. The grocery store buzzed with the frenetic energy of a typical Tuesday afternoon. Shoppers hurried along, their carts laden with groceries, their minds consumed by dinner plans and impending deadlines. But for Emily, time seemed to grind to a standstill, each second stretching into an eternity. She stared at the digital display on the register, the red numbers mocking her. $12. She looked down at her outstretched palm, tracing the lines of the worn dollar bills and the scattering of coins. She had meticulously counted the money 3 times before leaving their small apartment. A $5 bill, 3 singles, and a handful of quarters and dimes, painstakingly saved from collecting discarded recycling cans. In her mind, the sum had been sufficient. But now, facing the cashier's unwavering gaze, she realized the devastating truth. She had miscalculated. She was short, and the shame burned like a brand on her cheek. Well, Brenda, the cashier, her name tag proclaiming her identity, tapped her long, polished fingernails against the cold, unforgiving counter. She was a woman in her late 50s, her face etched with the weariness of countless hours spent on her feet. "Do you have the rest, honey? There's a line forming behind you, you know." Emily felt a wave of heat flush her face. She could feel the judging eyes of the other customers boring into her back, their impatience palpable. She glanced down at her brother, Timmy, his 7th birthday today. He stood beside her, his small hand gripping the edge of the counter, his eyes fixated on the plastic container holding the object of his desire. Inside lay a vanilla cake, adorned with vibrant blue frosting, and a miniature sugar rocket ship perched jauntily in the center. Timmy had spoken of nothing else for the past 2 months. He hadn't asked for toys, hadn't pleaded for a party. He simply wanted the rocket ship cake, a symbol of his boundless imagination and his fascination with the cosmos. I think I might have another quarter," Emily stammered, her voice barely audible. She struggled to maintain her composure, her stomach churning with anxiety. She plunged her hand into the pocket of her worn denim jacket, her fingers brushing against loose threads and a stray button, but no money. She frantically checked her other pocket, but it yielded nothing. Empty. "I'm sorry," Emily said, her eyes meeting Brenda's. "I thought I had enough. Can we take off the candles?" Brenda sighed, a loud, exasperated sound that made Emily shrink inwardly. "The candles are only $2. The cake is $10. You have $9. The math is simple. It's cruel, but it's simple." "Oh," Emily whispered, her voice laced with disappointment. Timmy tugged on her sleeve, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Em? What's wrong? Can we go eat the rocket now?" Emily turned to him, forcing a smile onto her face, the same brave facade her grandfather had worn in the faded photographs that adorned their mantel. "Hey, Timmy, you know what? I think I saw a better cake at home. A surprise cake." Timmy frowned, his confusion deepening. "But I like this one. You promised." "I know," Emily said, kneeling down so she was eye level with him, ignoring the impatient shuffling of feet behind her. "But plans change, soldier. Remember what Grandpa used to say. A good soldier adapts." Timmy straightened his posture slightly at the mention of his grandfather, a figure of unwavering strength and unwavering love. "Okay, I adapt." Emily stood up and turned to the cashier. She pushed the crumpled bills back into her pocket, her movements imbued with a newfound dignity. "We will not be taking the cake today. I apologize for the inconvenience." "Fine," Brenda muttered, her tone dismissive. She shoved the cake to the side, near the overflowing bin of returned items. "Next." Emily took Timmy's hand and walked past the line of waiting customers, her head held high, her gaze fixed straight ahead. She refused to let anyone see the tears welling up in her eyes. She wouldn't allow them to witness her vulnerability. She was a miller, and millers did not beg. Near the magazine rack, a man in a charcoal gray coat observed the entire scene with a discerning eye. Robert Sullivan, a man of 70 years, was a titan of industry, a force to be reckoned with. He owned towering skyscrapers, sprawling shipping fleets, and vast tracts of land, more than he could ever hope to explore in a lifetime. In the cutthroat world of business, he was known as a shark, a man of unwavering resolve and steely determination. But today, he was simply an old man, quietly purchasing a newspaper and a bottle of water. He stood motionless, his sharp blue eyes following the girl and the boy as they walked away. He recognized the girl. He didn't know her name, not exactly, but he knew her face. She was the daughter of Susan, one of the maids who meticulously cleaned his penthouse suite every Thursday. Susan was a quiet, hard-working woman, always keeping her head down, diligently performing her duties. During the summer months and school holidays, she sometimes had to bring her daughter along. The girl would sit quietly in the staff break room, immersed in thick books with tattered covers, as silent as a mouse. But it wasn't just recognition that stopped Robert in his tracks. It was something more, something that resonated deep within his soul. As the girl turned to leave, her jacket momentarily swung open, revealing a glimpse of her faded t-shirt and a small, silver metal pin to it. The metal was old, tarnished with age, but unmistakable to a man like Robert. It was a silver star. Robert's breath caught in his throat. The Silver Star, a medal of valor, awarded for gallantry in action, a symbol of extraordinary heroism. He looked closely at the girl's face, searching for clues, for a connection to the past. He saw the same determined jawline, the same steely glint in her eyes that he had witnessed in men on the battlefield 50 years ago. He watched her walk through the automatic doors, her hand firmly clasped in her brother's. She didn't glance back at the abandoned cake. She didn't shed a tear. She simply marched forward, a stoic soldier facing insurmountable odds. "Excuse me, sir? Are you buying that water?" Robert blinked, snapping back to the present. Brenda, the cashier, was looking at him expectantly. "Yes," Robert said, his voice deep and resonant, commanding attention without raising its volume. He stepped up to the counter and placed the water and the newspaper down. Then he pointed to the side. "And I'll take that cake as well, the one the little girl just left." Brenda looked surprised, her eyebrows arching in disbelief. "The rocket ship cake? You want that?" "Yes. And the candles," Robert added, his voice firm. "That will be $12.50, plus the water and the paper," Brenda said, her tone suddenly becoming more polite. She sensed money in him, a palpable aura of wealth that permeated his expensive coat and his confident demeanor. Robert pulled a crisp $20 bill from his leather wallet. "Keep the change." He picked up the plastic container, its contents holding so much weight. He examined the blue frosting and the miniature sugar rocket. It was a simple thing, a cheap thing, readily available for a few dollars. But to that little boy, it represented the entire world, a universe of dreams and aspirations. And to that young girl, leaving it behind was a defeat she did not deserve, a sacrifice born of circumstances beyond her control. Robert walked out of the store, the biting winter air stinging his face. The sky was a canvas of bruised purple, the sun sinking below the city skyline, casting long, skeletal shadows across the landscape. He scanned the parking lot, his eyes searching for two small figures. He saw them. Emily and Timmy were walking along the sidewalk, near the edge of the lot. They were heading towards the bus stop, but then they walked past it, their pace steady despite the frigid temperature. They were walking home, their small legs carrying them further and further away from their abandoned dream. It was too cold to walk, but saving bus fare was likely a crucial part of their carefully constructed budget, a sacrifice they were willing to make ends meet. Robert walked to his car, a black sedan that appeared modest at first glance, but possessed an engine worth more than the entire contents of the grocery store. He carefully placed the cake on the passenger seat, ensuring it wouldn't topple over. He got in, started the engine, and let it idle, a low rumble that vibrated through the chassis. He didn't turn on the headlights yet. He simply sat there, watching the two small figures as they trudged against the relentless wind, their shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He needed to know more. He needed to understand why the granddaughter of a war hero, a woman who wore a silver star on her chest, was counting pennies for a simple grocery store cake. And he needed to know why his own employee, Susan, was struggling so mightily, working tirelessly to keep her family afloat. Robert put the car in drive and slowly pulled out of the parking lot, maintaining a discreet distance between himself and the two children. He was going to follow them, to unravel the mysteries that lay hidden beneath their quiet struggles. "Is it far?" Timmy asked, his teeth chattering slightly. The wind cut through his thin jacket like a knife, chilling him to the bone. "Not far," Emily lied, her voice filled with false reassurance. "Just a few more blocks. Think warm thoughts, Timmy. Think about a volcano." "Lava is hot," Timmy said, tucking his chin into his scarf, trying to shield himself from the biting wind. "Exactly. We are walking on lava rocks. We have to move fast so our shoes don't melt," Emily said, squeezing his hand tightly. She felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had failed him. Today was supposed to be the one day Timmy felt special, a day dedicated solely to him. Their dad had left 3 years ago, packing a bag and vanishing without a trace, leaving a void in their lives that could never be filled. Their mom worked tirelessly, juggling 2, sometimes 3 jobs, scrubbing floors and cleaning toilets for wealthy people, sacrificing her own well-being to provide for her children. And Grandpa, their rock, their unwavering source of love and support, had been taken by cancer 6 months ago, leaving them adrift in a sea of grief and financial hardship. The medical bills had devoured everything: the house, the savings, the car. Now, they lived in a cramped, dingy apartment in the basement of a dilapidated brick building, its air perpetually thick with the smell of damp earth. Emily touched the silver metal beneath her jacket, feeling its weight against her chest. It was heavy, a constant reminder of her grandfather's legacy and the burden she now carried. He had given it to her before he died, his voice raspy and weak. "You're the captain now, Em," he had whispered, his eyes filled with love and unwavering trust. "You take care of the troops." Currently, the troops were freezing and cakeless, their morale at an all-time low. "Em." Timmy looked up at her, his eyes searching hers. "Did you really see a surprise cake at home? Or did you just say that because we didn't have money?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. Timmy was smart, far too perceptive for his 7 years. She looked down at him, her conscience weighing heavily on her. She couldn't lie to him, not about this. "We didn't have enough money, Timmy," she said softly, her voice filled with remorse. "I'm sorry. I tried to save, but the price went up." Timmy remained silent for a moment, processing the information. He kicked a small stone on the sidewalk, sending it skittering across the cracked pavement. It's okay. I don't need cake. I'm 7. 7 is big. Big kids don't need frosting. His maturity, his selfless attempt to protect her feelings, broke her heart more than his tears ever could. We will have something, Emily promised, her voice fierce with determination. Mom is bringing home leftovers from the restaurant job tonight. Maybe she has pie. Pie is good. Timmy agreed weakly, his enthusiasm waned. They turned the corner onto their street, a desolate stretch that seemed to stretch on forever. It was darker here, the streetlights flickering intermittently, some broken completely, casting long, ominous shadows. The houses were narrow and dilapidated, huddled close together like frightened refugees. A black car drove slowly past them, its presence an anomaly on the street of rusted vehicles and dented bumpers. Emily tightened her grip on Timmy's hand, her senses heightened, her instincts on alert. Grandpa had taught her to always be aware of her surroundings, to remain vigilant, to trust her gut. Head on a swivel, Emily, he had always said. The car didn't stop, but it moved at a snail's pace, its occupants seemingly observing them. It was shiny and clean, a stark contrast to the dilapidated surroundings. She watched it turn the corner and disappear, but the unease lingered. Come on, she said, quickening her pace. Almost there. They reached their building, a 3-story brick structure with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. They lived in Unit B, the basement level, a dimly lit space that felt more like a dungeon than a home. To reach their apartment, they had to descend a small set of concrete stairs below the sidewalk level, a descent into the depths of their despair. Emily unlocked the door, the metallic click echoing in the oppressive silence. The air inside was warmer than the frigid outdoors, but not by much. They kept the heat low to save on the electric bill, sacrificing comfort for the sake of survival. Shoes off, Emily commanded gently. Timmy dutifully kicked off his worn sneakers, his small feet bare against the cold linoleum floor. Is Mom home? Not yet. She works until 7 o'clock at the big house. Then she has the shift at the diner until midnight, remember? Oh yeah, Timmy said, his voice subdued. He slumped onto the worn-out sofa, its springs groaning in protest. The living room was small and sparsely furnished, the only splashes of color coming from a faded rug that covered the cracks in the linoleum floor and a framed American flag displayed prominently on the wall, encased in a triangular case. Next to it hung a photograph of a man in uniform, smiling, his rugged, handsome face radiating warmth and strength. Sergeant William Miller, a hero in every sense of the word. Emily went to the small kitchenette, its cramped space barely accommodating a small stove and a battered refrigerator. She opened the cupboard, revealing its meager contents. A box of crackers, a can of tomato soup, and half a jar of peanut butter. Okay, she said to herself, trying to inject some enthusiasm into her voice. Birthday dinner. She could make tomato soup and crumble crackers into it. It wasn't a party, but it was warm, and it was something. She filled a pot with water and the soup concentrate, stirring it mechanically. As she stirred, she felt the tears finally stinging her eyes, threatening to spill over. She wiped them away angrily, her jaw clenched. Crying didn't fix anything. Crying didn't buy cake. Suddenly, a knock echoed through the apartment, a firm, solid knock that reverberated through the small space. It wasn't the landlord, who pounded on the door like he wanted to break the wood. Nor was it the neighbor, who scratched lightly as if afraid to disturb them. Emily turned off the stove, her heart pounding in her chest. She walked to the door and tried to look through the peephole, but it was too high for her. She dragged a chair over, climbed on top, and peered through the small opening. Standing there in the dim light of the hallway was an older man in a gray coat, holding a white plastic grocery bag in one hand and a familiar plastic container in the other. It was the man from the store, the one who had been watching her at the checkout. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat. Had she stolen something by accident? Was he the police, here to arrest her for some unknown crime? No, he didn't look like the police. He looked rich, his clothes impeccably tailored, his demeanor exuding an air of authority. "Who is it?" Timmy whispered from the couch, his voice laced with apprehension. "Shoo!" Emily hissed, her eyes fixed on the man outside. "I know you are in there." The man's voice came through the door, deep and calm. "I am not here to harm you. I believe you forgot something at the store." Emily hesitated, torn between her fear and her inherent sense of trust. Grandpa had always warned her, never open the door for strangers. But this man had a voice that sounded like Grandpa's, a voice that resonated with honesty and integrity. It sounded like authority, the kind of authority that commanded respect without demanding it. She unlocked the deadbolt, but kept the chain securely fastened. She opened the door just a crack, about 2 inches, and one blue eye peered out at him, wary and guarded. "We didn't forget anything," Emily said firmly, her voice trembling slightly. "We just couldn't pay. I didn't steal." Robert Sullivan looked at the sliver of the girl's face, illuminated by the dim light spilling from the apartment. He saw the fear etched in her features, but he also saw the unwavering defiance, the spirit of a warrior refusing to surrender. "I know you didn't steal," Robert said, his voice gentle. He lifted the cake container slightly so she could see the blue frosting and the miniature rocket ship through the narrow opening. "But a soldier never leaves a man behind, and I believe this rocket ship belongs to your squad." Emily stared at the cake, her mind struggling to comprehend the situation. Then, she looked up at the man's face, searching for any sign of deception. He wasn't smiling a fake, condescending smile. His expression was serious, his eyes filled with genuine concern. "Who are you?" she asked, her suspicions slowly giving way to curiosity. "My name is Robert," he said. "I know your mother, Susan, and I knew the man whose medal you are wearing." Emily froze, her hand instinctively moving to touch the silver star beneath her jacket. She unhooked the chain and slowly opened the door, revealing Robert standing in the hallway, his tall frame casting a long shadow that stretched across the small apartment. He stepped forward, not aggressively, but with a quiet purpose, his presence filling the small space. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "I have a delivery for a Mr. Timmy." Timmy jumped up from the couch, his eyes locking onto the plastic container, his face lighting up with uncontainable joy. "The rocket!" Emily stood aside, her hand still gripping the door handle, ready to slam it shut at the first sign of danger. She didn't know why, but she trusted him. Maybe it was the way he stood, tall and unwavering. Maybe it was because he recognized the medal, a symbol of her grandfather's sacrifice and unwavering dedication to his country. "Come in," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Robert stepped into the small basement apartment, his eyes taking in the scene instantly. The peeling paint, the clean but worn furniture, the faint smell of tomato soup simmering on the stove, and there, prominently displayed on the wall, the American flag, a silent testament to a life of service and sacrifice. He walked over to the small table and placed the cake down gently, his movements deliberate and respectful. "Happy birthday, son," Robert said to Timmy, his voice filled with genuine affection. Timmy looked at Emily for permission, his eyes pleading. She nodded, a small smile gracing her lips. Timmy ran to the table, his face beaming with unadulterated joy. "Wow, it's the real one. Look, it's the real one." Robert turned to Emily, his gaze unwavering. The room was small, and his presence filled it, making her feel both vulnerable and strangely safe. "You're Susan's daughter," he stated, his voice gentle. "Yes, I'm Emily. And that," Robert said, pointing to the photograph on the wall, "is William Miller." "My grandfather," Emily said, her chin lifting slightly, her voice filled with pride. "I served with the 101st Airborne," Robert said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "Your grandfather was a legend in the Corps. They called him Iron Will." Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "You knew him?" "I knew of him. Everyone did," Robert said, his voice filled with respect. Robert looked around the impoverished apartment again, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. A man like William Miller, A true American hero should have left a legacy of security and comfort for his family. The fact that his grandchildren were living in a basement, counting pennies for a simple birthday cake, made Robert feel a deep, burning anger. Not at them, but at the system, at the world, and perhaps at himself for not noticing sooner, for allowing this injustice to occur under his very nose. "Does your mother know you are here?" Emily asked, her voice filled with concern. "No," Robert said. "I saw you at the store. I followed you to make sure you got home safe. But now that I am here, we need to talk." "About what?" Emily asked, her defensive instincts kicking in again. "About why the daughter of a hero is returning a birthday cake," Robert said, his voice unwavering. "And about how we are going to fix it." The kitchen table was a small, round piece of furniture with a laminate top that had peeled at the edges, revealing the particle board beneath. Robert sat on a folding metal chair, its cold surface pressing against his back through his expensive coat. He didn't move, his gaze fixed on Timmy as he devoured a slice of the blue cake with a focus that only a 7-year-old could summon. "This is the best rocket ever," Timmy mumbled, his mouth smeared with blue frosting. "Chew, Timmy. Don't inhale it," Emily said, her voice filled with gentle admonishment. She stood by the stove, stirring the soup, the scent of tomato and metallic tin filling the small room, a smell that evoked memories of lean times in Robert's childhood, during the war before the skyscrapers and the private jets. Robert turned his gaze to Emily, his eyes filled with concern. She was too young to have that worry line etched between her eyebrows, a line that spoke of burdens carried and responsibilities shouldered. She moved around the kitchen with an efficiency that spoke of necessity, not choice, her movements honed by years of taking care of others. "You run a tight ship, Emily," Robert observed, his voice filled with admiration. Emily poured the thin red soup into 3 chipped bowls, her movements economical and precise. She placed a stack of saltine crackers in the center of the table, a meager offering, but all she had to give. "Someone has to. Mom is tired when she gets home. I try to have dinner ready." "Your mother works hard," Robert said, his voice soft. It was a statement, not a question, an acknowledgement of her tireless efforts. "She works all the time," Timmy chimed in, licking frosting off his thumb, his eyes sparkling with joy. "She scrubs the big floors at the tower. She says the floors are so shiny you can see your nose in them." Robert flinched slightly, a wave of guilt washing over him. The tower was his building, the Sullivan Plaza, a symbol of his success and his power. He walked those floors every day, oblivious to the hands that made them shine, never thinking about the knees that knelt on the marble to polish it to a mirror sheen. "She does a good job," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "The floors are indeed very shiny." Emily placed a bowl of soup in front of Robert, her eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and gratitude. "It's not much, but it's hot." Robert looked at the soup, his mind racing. He wasn't hungry, and he knew that every spoonful he ate was a spoonful taken from their mouths. But to refuse would be an insult to her hospitality, a rejection of her heartfelt offering. In this house, offering food was a sacrifice, a gesture of profound generosity. Rejecting it would be a sin, a violation of the unspoken code of honor that bound them together. "Thank you," Robert said, his voice filled with sincerity. "It looks delicious." He picked up the spoon and took a small sip, his expression carefully neutral. It was watery and needed salt, but he ate it with the same respect he would show a 5-star meal in Paris, acknowledging the effort and the sacrifice that had gone into its preparation. "So," Robert said, wiping his mouth with a paper napkin, his eyes searching Emily's, "your grandfather, Iron Will, did he tell you stories about the war?" Emily sat down next to Timmy, her movements hesitant. She didn't start eating immediately, her focus solely on Timmy, making sure he had enough crackers to dip in his soup. "Sometimes, mostly," she said softly. "He talked about the men. He said the medals didn't matter. He said the only thing that mattered was the guy standing next to you." Robert nodded slowly, his heart aching with a mixture of sorrow and admiration. He was right. Will was the best of us, a true leader, a man of unwavering courage and compassion. I remember one time near the Ardens, Robert said, his voice distant, his eyes focused on a memory long past. We were pinned down under heavy fire, cold, colder than this room. We had no food for 2 days. Timmy stopped chewing, his eyes wide with fascination. Did you eat bugs? Robert chuckled, a dry, rusty sound that echoed in the small room. No bugs, but we ate snow to stop the hunger pangs. Your grandfather found a tin of peaches in an abandoned farmhouse. Just one tin. There were 12 of us. What did he do? Emily asked, leaning forward, her soup forgotten, her eyes riveted on Robert's face. He opened it, Robert said, his voice filled with reverence, his eyes distant, and he passed it around. Everyone got one slice. He made sure the youngest private ate first. He ate the syrup at the bottom. That was Will. He always fed the troops first. Robert looked pointedly at Emily, his eyes filled with admiration. I see the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Emily looked down at her bowl, a faint blush coloring her pale cheeks. I just wanted Timmy to have a birthday. And you succeeded, Robert said, his voice filled with conviction. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a notebook and a gold pen, their presence incongruous in the humble surroundings. Emily, I want to ask you a question, and I need a soldier's honest answer. No protecting the command. Understood? Emily straightened up, her eyes filled with determination. Yes, sir. How much is the rent for this place? Emily hesitated, her eyes darting towards the door as if expecting her mother to burst in and stop her. But the door remained closed, the silence amplifying her unease. $600, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Robert wrote it down in his notebook, his pen gliding across the page. And the utilities? Heat is electric. It's expensive. In the winter, maybe $200. We keep it off mostly. And food? Mom gives me $50 a week for groceries. I use coupons. I try to make it stretch. Robert did the math in his head, his mind calculating the brutal arithmetic of their existence. Susan's salary at the cleaning company, a company he contracted but didn't manage directly, was likely minimum wage. After taxes, she was probably bringing home barely enough to cover the rent, leaving her with pennies to feed and clothe her children. The rest was a constant juggling act, a dangerous and exhausting struggle where one dropped ball meant disaster. Is there debt? Robert asked gently, his voice filled with compassion. Emily nodded, her eyes filled with shame. The hospital. Grandpa was sick for a long time. The ambulance rides. The medicine. Mom says we are paying it off, but the letters keep coming. They are printed in red ink. She shuddered, her voice barely a whisper. Red ink. The color of blood in the financial world. I see, Robert said, his voice low. He closed the notebook, his face grim. He didn't need to write anything else down. He had seen enough. The picture was clear, a stark and heartbreaking portrait of poverty and resilience. Suddenly, the lights in the apartment flickered, sputtering erratically. They buzzed angrily, dimmed to a dull orange, then surged back to brightness, only to repeat the cycle again. The wiring is bad, Emily explained casually, as if it were a normal occurrence. The landlord says he will fix it next month. He said that last month, too. Robert's hand clenched around his pen, his knuckles turning white. He owned buildings all over the city, properties meticulously maintained by armies of engineers and maintenance staff. If a light bulb flickered in one of his hotels, a maintenance crew was there in 5 minutes. Here, a widow and her 2 children lived in a fire trap, their lives endangered by faulty wiring and a negligent landlord who made empty promises. The sound of a heavy metal door scraping open echoed from the hallway, followed by the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of tired feet on concrete stairs. Mom's home, Timmy shouted, jumping off his chair, his face still smeared with blue frosting. Emily stood up quickly, her eyes filled with a sudden panic. She looked at Robert, her voice dropping to a whisper. Please, she begged. Don't tell her I told you about the money. She has a lot of pride. She doesn't want anyone to know. Your secret is safe with me, Robert promised, his eyes filled with compassion. The door handle turned, and the door opened, revealing Susan Miller standing on the threshold. She was a woman in her late 30s, but fatigue had aged her beyond her years. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, strands escaping to frame a face that was pale and drawn, etched with the weariness of countless hours of hard labor. She wore a thick, shapeless coat concealed her cleaning uniform, a stark contrast to the weariness etched on her face. In her hand, she clutched a plastic bag, a small offering from the diner where she pulled her second shift, the scent of lukewarm apple pie wafting from within. "Hey, monkeys," she announced, forcing a cheerful lilt into her voice, though the forced brightness failed to reach her tired eyes. "I brought pie." She held up the bag, a gesture of love and a fleeting attempt to inject some joy into their meager existence. Then, she stopped, her smile faltering. Her gaze snagged on a pair of boots first, gleaming leather boots that spoke of wealth and privilege, polished to a blinding sheen, a stark contrast to the worn linoleum of her floor. Her eyes traveled upwards, past impeccably pressed gray trousers, to a charcoal coat that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. Finally, her eyes landed on Robert's face, his expression unreadable. The plastic bag, her offering of pie, slipped from her numb fingers, landing on the floor with a soft, pathetic thud. Mr. Sullivan," Susan stammered, her hand flying to her mouth as if to catch the words before they escaped. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin ashen. "Oh my God! Is something wrong? Did I forget to lock the executive suite? I swear I checked the doors. I swear." A tremor ran through her, a physical manifestation of pure, unadulterated fear. Fear of losing her already precarious job. Fear of the man who held her family's survival in the palm of his hand. Robert rose to his feet, his face etched with concern. A sharp pang of guilt pierced his chest. He had no desire to be the villain in her story, the heartless titan crushing the lives of those beneath him. "Susan," he said, his voice soft and soothing, a balm to her frayed nerves. "You are not in trouble. The pie is fine. Everything is fine." Susan's brow furrowed in confusion. Her gaze darted from Robert to Emily, then to Timmy and the bright blue cake sitting proudly on the table. Then, her voice laced with suspicion, she asked, "What are you doing in my house?" She instinctively took a step back, as if she were the intruder, the one who didn't belong. "How did you find us?" "I brought the cake," Timmy announced proudly, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. "Well, he brought it, but it's for me." Susan's eyes narrowed, her gaze lingering on the cake, the expensive bakery container, the elaborate rocket ship design. She looked back at Robert, the first tendrils of defiance beginning to push back against the fear. "You bought my son a cake?" she asked slowly, each word measured. "I ran into your children at the grocery store," Robert explained, choosing his words with deliberate care. "There was a complication with the checkout. I simply assisted a neighbor." "A neighbor," Susan repeated, a bitter irony coating her voice. "You live in the penthouse, Mr. Sullivan. We live in the basement. We are not neighbors." "Mom, he knows Grandpa," Emily interjected, stepping bravely between them. "He served with him in the 101st. Susan froze, her eyes searching Robert's face. She saw the way he stood, the ramrod straight posture, the military bearing that time had failed to erase. She glanced at the faded photograph of her father on the wall, then back at the billionaire standing in her humble living room. "You knew my father?" she asked softly, the edge in her voice softening slightly. "I did," Robert confirmed. "He was a good man, a brave man." Susan let out a long, shuddering breath, the air escaping her lungs in a rush. She leaned against the door frame for support, her energy seemingly depleted. He was stubborn, though, would never take a handout. She glanced at the cake again, a mixture of gratitude and resentment swirling within her. "Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate the gesture, truly, but I can pay for my own family. I don't need charity from my boss. I will pay you back for the cake on Monday. You can deduct it from my wages. Susan, Robert began, his voice gentle but firm. Please, she interrupted, her voice rising, the carefully constructed dam threatening to break. I work 2 jobs. I take care of my kids. We are fine. We don't need you coming down here to inspect us. I am not inspecting you, Robert countered firmly. I am visiting, and I am seeing things that concern me, not as your boss but as a human being. He gestured around the room, taking in the peeling paint, the damp corners, the threadbare furniture. You are working 16 hours a day, Susan. I checked your logs and you are coming home to this. Why didn't you come to HR? Why didn't you say you were drowning? HR. Susan laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that echoed in the small room. Mr. Sullivan, the last time I asked for a shift change to take Timmy to the doctor, my supervisor told me there were 10 people waiting for my job. If I complain, I'm gone. If I say I'm struggling, I'm a liability. Robert fell silent, the truth of her words striking him like a physical blow. He sat in his boardroom, poring over spreadsheets of profits and efficiency, blind to the fear culture that his middle managers had fostered. He hadn't seen the shadow of threat hanging over people like Susan. That supervisor, Robert said, his voice turning cold as ice, a chilling contrast to his earlier warmth, will be dealt with. Susan's eyes widened in panic, the fear returning in full force. No, please don't say anything. If you make a scene, they will take it out on me when you leave. Please, Mr. Sullivan, just go. Thank you for the cake. Thank you for being kind to Timmy, but please leave us alone. She bent down and retrieved the bag of pie, her movements stiff and mechanical. She walked to the counter and placed it down, her back to him, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, desperately trying to conceal her tears from her children. Emily looked at Robert, her young eyes pleading with an unspoken urgency. Do something, they begged. Robert's gaze fixed on the woman's trembling back, then swept over the deplorable conditions of the room. He realized that simply writing a check wouldn't solve anything. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about a broken system that punished the hardworking and vulnerable. He couldn't just walk away. If he left now, nothing would change. Monday would come, and Susan would be back on her hands and knees, scrubbing his floors, living in constant fear of losing her meager lifeline. I cannot leave, Robert declared. Susan whirled around, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Excuse me? I cannot leave you here, Robert clarified, his voice filled with newfound resolve. Not tonight. The wiring in this building is a fire hazard. I saw the lights flicker. I smelled the ozone. It is not safe. It's all we have, Susan said defensively, her voice tinged with a desperate pride. It is not all you have available, Robert corrected. Pack a bag. What? Pack a bag for yourself and the children. Just the essentials for tonight. Where are we going? Timmy asked, a spark of excitement flickering in his eyes. I am not going anywhere with you, Susan stated firmly, crossing her arms defiantly. I don't know what you think this is, but I am not some charity case you can just scoop up. It is not charity, Robert snapped, his patience fraying, not at her, but at the intolerable situation. It is a command decision. I am condemning this apartment as unsafe. I own the insurance company that covers this block. I am declaring it a hazard. He was lying, embellishing the truth with the authority only wealth and power could command. He probably didn't own the insurance company for this specific block. But he said it with enough conviction that Susan hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing her weary face. I have a guest suite at the plaza, Robert said, softening his tone. It is empty. It has heat. It has safe wiring, and it has room for a family. Just for tonight, Susan, until I can get a safety inspector down here tomorrow to fix these wires. Please do it for the children. Susan looked at Timmy, who was shivering slightly despite his coat. She looked at Emily, who offered a small, encouraging nod. Susan's shoulders slumped, the last vestiges of resistance draining away. She was too tired to argue with a billionaire. "Just for tonight," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "And I pay for the taxi." Robert offered a small, sad smile. "We can discuss the transportation logistics later. Get your things." As Susan disappeared into the back room to pack, Robert found himself staring at the framed photo of William Miller on the wall. The sergeant seemed to be looking back at him, his gaze both stern and questioning. "I'll fix this, Will," Robert vowed silently. "I promise you, I'll make it right." But Robert didn't know yet that the faulty wiring was the least of Susan's problems, and he had no inkling that by removing them from this dilapidated basement, he was about to set off a chain reaction, unleashing a torrent of gossip and unforeseen troubles that would threaten the very foundations of his carefully constructed world. The ride to Sullivan Plaza was cloaked in silence, heavy with unspoken anxieties. The city lights blurred past the windows of the luxury sedan, transforming into streaks of gold and crimson against the darkened glass. Inside, the car provided a mobile sanctuary, a cocoon of warmth and quiet luxury. The heated leather seats seemed to embrace the chilled children, attempting to thaw their frozen spirits. Susan sat rigidly in the front passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly around her worn purse in her lap. She refused to relax, refusing to lean back against the plush leather. Her gaze remained fixed straight ahead, her jaw clenched. She felt like a woman entering enemy territory, acutely aware of her trespass. This was her boss's car, a symbol of a divide she was never meant to cross. In the back, Timmy had already succumbed to sleep, his small body slack against the seat. The warmth and the surprising abundance of food had finally lulled him into peaceful slumber. Emily, however, remained wide awake, her eyes darting from the back of her mother's head to the enigmatic man behind the wheel. Robert drove with quiet confidence, his hands steady on the wheel. He had foregone his usual chauffeur tonight. He preferred the solitude of driving himself when he needed to collect his thoughts, to sift through the complexities of a situation. And tonight, his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and burgeoning plans. "We are here," Robert announced softly as he pulled up to the curb. He deliberately bypassed the discreet underground garage reserved for staff and tradespeople, opting instead for the grand front entrance, a deliberate act of defiance against the unspoken rules of his own world. The doorman, a seasoned professional named Henry, who had faithfully served at Sullivan Plaza for over 2 decades, stepped out briskly, his movements precise and practiced. He reached for the door, a polite greeting already forming on his lips. "Good evening, Mr. Sullivan. I wasn't expecting you back so." Henry's voice trailed off, his practiced smile faltering. His eyes landed on the woman in the unglamorous cleaning uniform in the front seat. He then noticed the sleeping boy and the young girl in the faded denim jacket huddled in the back, their faces etched with a mixture of exhaustion and wonder. "Henry," Robert said, stepping out of the car and smoothly buttoning his coat. "Please park the car. These are my guests." "Guests, sir?" Henry blinked, momentarily losing his composure. Decades of experience in maintaining a polished facade struggled against the surprise that registered on his face. "Of course, right away." Susan stepped out of the car, feeling dwarfed by the towering glass facade of the building she cleaned meticulously every day. Usually, she slipped in unnoticed through the service entrance in the alley, punching a time clock next to the overflowing dumpsters. Tonight, she was walking on the red carpet, exposed and vulnerable. "I can carry him," Susan offered, reaching for the sleeping Timmy. "I have him," Robert said gently but firmly. He reached into the back and lifted the 7-year-old with surprising strength for a man of 70. Timmy stirred briefly but remained asleep, instinctively resting his head against Robert's exquisitely soft cashmere coat. "Come," Robert said, his voice an implicit command. They walked through the opulent lobby, a cavernous space of shimmering marble and gleaming gold. Susan typically saw this floor at 2 a.m. when she was tirelessly buffing the stone to a mirror shine. Seeing it now, with the crystal chandeliers ablaze, she felt a wave of dizziness, as if she had stepped into a dream. They boarded the private elevator, the numbers on the panel climbing higher and higher. My ears popped, Emily whispered, her voice filled with awe. Swallow hard, Robert advised kindly. It helps. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse, revealing a space that defied all expectations. If the lobby was grand, this was a different world altogether, a realm of vast open spaces and breathtaking views. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic vista of the entire city, spread out like a glittering map of human ambition. The furniture was modern, sleek, and minimalist, chosen for its aesthetic appeal rather than its comfort. It was undeniably beautiful, but it felt sterile, more like a museum than a home. Robert carried Timmy to a plush, oversized sofa and laid him down gently. He retrieved a throw blanket made of thick, luxurious wool and carefully covered the sleeping boy. The guest wing is down that hall, Robert said, pointing to the left. There are 3 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. You will find fresh towels and robes. Susan stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if warding off the cold. She glanced down at the flawlessly polished floors, recognizing the specific brand of wax used to maintain their luster. She knew firsthand how difficult it was to remove even the slightest scuff mark from this particular type of wood. Mr. Sullivan? Susan began, her voice trembling slightly, betraying her inner turmoil. This is too much. We can't stay here. I'll call a cab. I can't be here. Why? Robert asked, his brow furrowed with concern. He walked over to a small, understated bar and poured a glass of water, offering it to her with a gentle gesture. Because I clean this place? Susan blurted out, the weight of exhaustion and humiliation finally breaking through her carefully constructed composure. I clean your toilets, Mr. Sullivan. I empty your trash. I can't sleep in your guest room. It's not right. Confuses everything. Robert placed the glass of water in her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. He looked her directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering. Susan, look at me. She reluctantly raised her head, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a mixture of desperation and defiance. You are not cleaning tonight, Robert said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Tonight, you are a mother who needs a safe roof for her children, and I am a man who has too much roof and not enough family. You are doing me a favor by filling these rooms. It is too quiet here. He turned to Emily, who was captivated by the dazzling display of city lights spread out before her. Emily, what do you see? Robert asked. Everything, she breathed, her voice filled with childlike wonder. It looks like stars, but on the ground. It does, Robert agreed, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Perspectives change depending on where you stand. Sometimes you need to come up high to see where the paths lead. Your grandfather and I, we spent a lot of time in muddy trenches, looking up at the sky. We promised ourselves that if we made it home, we wouldn't spend our lives in the mud. He turned back to Susan, his expression softening. Will Miller fought for a better life. Don't dishonor his sacrifice by refusing a safe harbor when the storm hits. Susan lowered her head, her shoulders slumping slightly. The mention of her father always had a way of disarming her. She took a small sip of the water, her hand trembling slightly. Okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Just for tonight because of the wiring. Good, Robert said, his voice filled with relief. Now I imagine you are hungry. Real food, not just soup. We're okay. Susan started to protest automatically, her ingrained habit of self-denial kicking in. I am not, Robert countered, his tone playful. And I hate eating alone. I'm going to make sandwiches, grilled cheese. It's the only thing I know how to cook without burning the building down. A small, genuine smile flickered across Emily's lips. You can cook? I can melt cheese on bread, Robert corrected with a self-deprecating grin. Come on, I need a sous chef. 30 minutes later, the atmosphere in the penthouse had undergone a dramatic transformation. The kitchen, a marvel of stainless steel and granite, was now filled with the comforting aroma of butter and toasted bread. They sat not at the formal dining table, but at the kitchen island, their elbows almost touching. Timmy had roused from his slumber, drawn in by the alluring smell of food, emerging sleepy-eyed but undeniably hungry. They ate grilled cheese sandwiches and creamy tomato soup, the latter poured from a gourmet pouch Robert had unearthed from the depths of his well-stocked pantry. Susan ate slowly, each bite a small act of surrender. With every mouthful, her shoulders seemed to drop a fraction of an inch, the tension gradually seeping out of her body. The warmth of the room, the feeling of safety, the unexpected generosity of the food. It was slowly but surely seducing her defenses. "So," Robert said, wiping a stray crumb from his lip, "I want to talk about the red ink." Emily, bless her honest soul, spoke up before Susan could stop her. "Mentioned." Susan froze, her eyes flashing a warning at Emily. "Don't look at her," Robert said gently. "She's a good soldier. She reported the situation accurately. You have medical debt." Susan sighed, placing her sandwich back on her plate. "My father's cancer. The insurance hit a cap. The treatments were experimental. We tried everything." "How much?" Robert asked. 40,000, Susan said, the number hanging in the air like a lead weight. "I pay 200 a month. The interest eats most of it. I'll be paying it until I'm 80. And the rent? I'm behind," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. 2 months. The landlord said if I don't pay by Friday, he's changing the locks. That's why I was picking up the extra shifts." She paused, her voice catching in her throat. "That's why she stopped. That's why I couldn't buy the cake. I had the money in my hand this morning, but the landlord called. He wanted a good faith payment. I gave it to him. I had to choose between a roof and a cake." Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. "I felt like such a failure. A mother should never have to look at her child and say no to a birthday cake." Robert reached across the island and placed his hand over hers. His hand was weathered, spotted with age, but his grip was surprisingly strong and reassuring. "You chose the roof," Robert said, his voice soft but firm. "That is not failure, Susan. That is survival. That is command. You protected your unit." "I'm tired, Mr. Sullivan," she whispered, the admission escaping her lips like a long-suppressed sigh. "I am so tired." "I know," Robert said, his voice filled with empathy. "I know." Timmy finished his sandwich and let out a loud, exaggerated yawn. "Can we watch TV?" he asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. "The screen is as big as a movie." "Maybe for 10 minutes, Robert conceded, his gaze softening. "Emily, show him the remote. It's on the coffee table." The children eagerly darted into the expansive living room, the sound of a cartoon filling the vast silence of the penthouse. Susan stood up to clear the plates, her movements automatic. "I'll wash these." "Leave them," Robert ordered gently. "The housekeeper comes in the morning." "I am the housekeeper," Susan said, the words a reflexive response. She reached for a plate. And then it happened. As she reached for the plate, Susan swayed, her face turning ashen. The plate slipped from her fingers and shattered on the pristine tile floor, the sound echoing sharply in the otherwise quiet kitchen. "Susan!" Robert exclaimed, rising to his feet quickly. She blinked, her expression confused. I feel dizzy. The room is spinning." She took a step back, blindly reaching for the counter for support, but she missed. Her knees buckled beneath her. "Mom!" Emily screamed from the living room, her voice laced with panic. Robert moved with a speed and agility he hadn't possessed in 20 years. He caught her just before she hit the floor, his arms wrapping around her frail body. He realized with a sickening lurch in his stomach that beneath the bulky, shapeless coat, she was alarmingly light, bordering on emaciated. She had been skipping meals to ensure her children had enough to eat. He gently lowered her to the ground, kneeling beside her, his face etched with concern. "Susan, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, her gaze unfocused. Her skin was clammy and cold to the touch. "My chest," she gasped, her voice strained. "It hurts. Hard to breathe." "Emily," Robert barked, his voice sharp with urgency. "Bring me the phone now." Emily ran into the kitchen, her face pale with terror. Timmy stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide with confusion and fear, tears streaming down his face. Robert snatched the phone from Emily's trembling hand. He didn't call 911, opting instead to dial a private number. "Dr. Aries," Robert said into the phone, his voice commanding and sharp. "This is Robert Sullivan. I have a medical emergency at the penthouse. Female, late 30s. Signs of extreme exhaustion, malnutrition, possible cardiac stress. Get here now and bring the portable unit." He disconnected the call. He looked at Emily, his gaze calm and reassuring despite the urgency of the situation. "Emily, listen to me," Robert said, his voice firm but gentle. He was no longer the benevolent billionaire, but the seasoned sergeant, accustomed to taking charge in life-or-death situations. "Now take Timmy into the guest room. Turn on the TV loud. Close the door." "Is she dying?" Emily sobbed, her voice choked with fear. "Is she going to be like Grandpa?" "No," Robert said fiercely, his voice ringing with conviction. "Not on my watch. She has just crashed. Her engine ran out of fuel. But I need you to take care of your brother so I can take care of your mother. Can you do that?" Emily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her small face a mask of determination. She nodded. She reached for Timmy's hand, her touch gentle but firm. "Come on, Timmy. Let's go watch the movie." She led the crying boy down the hall, carefully closing the door behind them, shutting out the unfolding drama. Robert turned back to Susan. She was conscious, but barely. He loosened the collar of her uniform, trying to ease her breathing. He took her hand in his touch surprisingly tender. "Hold on, Susan," he whispered, his voice low and soothing. "Help is coming. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. You can let go. I've got you." Susan looked up at him, her eyes filled with a profound fear. Not for herself, but for what would happen next. "The kids," she wheezed, her voice barely audible. "If I go to the hospital social services, they'll take them." "No," Robert promised, his voice filled with unwavering conviction. "They won't touch them. You are in my house. You are under my protection. Nobody takes them. I swear it on the Silver Star." Susan's eyes fluttered closed, her breathing becoming increasingly shallow. Robert sat on the cold tile floor of his billion-dollar penthouse, holding the hand of his cleaning lady, waiting for the elevator to ding, the silence punctuated only by her ragged breaths. He glanced at the shattered pieces of the broken plates scattered across the floor, a stark symbol of broken lives and shattered dreams. He realized he had been wrong earlier. He hadn't just been ignoring the people who worked for him. He had been ignoring the stark reality of the world he had helped to build, a world where a woman worked herself to the bone for the sake of a birthday cake and a cold, damp basement. The elevator dinged, breaking the silence. The storm had arrived, and Robert knew with a chilling certainty that when the sun rose, nothing could ever go back to the way it was before. He was done being an observer, a detached bystander in his own gilded world. It was time to go back to war, to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The private wing of St. Jude's Hospital was quiet and hushed, a world away from the chaos and desperation of the emergency room. The air was infused with the calming scent of lavender and the sterile odor of antiseptic, a sharp contrast to the damp earth smell of the basement apartment. Susan lay peacefully in a bed with crisp white sheets, and 4 lines snaking into her arm, delivering a life-giving cocktail of fluids and vitamins. She was asleep, her face relaxed and serene for the first time in years. The deep lines of worry etched around her eyes seemed to have softened, revealing a hint of the vibrant woman she once was. Robert stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the parking lot below, his thoughts swirling like the city lights. It was 3 a.m. He hadn't slept, nor did he feel the slightest inclination to. The door opened softly, and Dr. Aries stepped into the room, holding a clipboard in his hands. "She is stable," the doctor said, keeping his voice low so as not to disturb the sleeping patient. "It was exactly what you suspected. Extreme exhaustion, dehydration, and stress-induced arrhythmia. She has been running on fumes." Robert. Another week of this, and her heart might have just stopped. Robert nodded slowly, a cold weight settling in his stomach. She was working in my building, he said, more to himself than to the doctor. She was collapsing right under my feet, and I was worried about stock prices. You are fixing it now, Aries said, offering a reassuring smile. She needs rest. Real rest, not just a weekend off. She needs months to rebuild her reserves. She will get it, Robert promised, his voice filled with unwavering resolve. And the children? They are asleep in the waiting room suite. I didn't want to send them away. Dr. Aries patted Robert on the shoulder, his gesture conveying both sympathy and respect. You did a good thing tonight. Most people would have just called an ambulance and walked away. I didn't do a good thing, Robert corrected him grimly, his gaze hardening. I did a necessary thing. There is a difference. The next morning, the sun rose cold and bright, casting long shadows across the city. Robert had his assistant arrange for fresh clothes to be delivered to the hospital for both the children and Susan, ensuring they had something comfortable and clean to wear. He also made 2 phone calls, setting in motion a series of events that would ripple through the carefully ordered world he inhabited. At 9 a.m., a man named Mr. Henderson arrived at the hospital waiting room, his face pale and drawn. Henderson was the regional manager for the cleaning contractor that serviced Sullivan Plaza, and he looked profoundly nervous, clutching his briefcase like a shield against an impending attack. Mr. Sullivan, Henderson stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I came as soon as you called. Is there a problem with the contract? Robert sat in a worn leather chair, still wearing the same clothes he had worn the night before. He looked tired, his face etched with fatigue, but his eyes were sharp and dangerous, radiating an intensity that made Henderson want to flee. Sit down, Henderson. Henderson reluctantly sank into the chair, his movements stiff and awkward. I have an employee of yours in that room, Robert said, gesturing towards Susan's closed door. Susan Miller. Do you know her? I believe I've seen the name on the roster level for sanitation. She collapsed last night from malnutrition and exhaustion, Robert said calmly, his voice dangerously soft. She was working double shifts because she was terrified of losing her job. She told me that her supervisor threatened to replace her if she asked for time off to take her sick child to the doctor. Henderson paled visibly, his hand tightening around the handle of his briefcase. Sir, I assure you that is not our company policy. It is your culture, Robert snapped, his voice rising, his patience wearing thin. And it happens in my building. That makes it my problem. Robert leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to fire that supervisor today, and then you are going to rewrite your entire HR policy regarding sick leave and wages for the staff in my buildings. If you don't, I cancel the contract, and I will make sure every other building owner in this city knows why. Henderson squeaked, his voice barely audible. That will cost us a fortune. It will cost you less than losing my business, Robert said, his voice cold and unwavering. Fix it or get out. Henderson scrambled to his feet and fled the waiting room, his face slick with sweat, his briefcase clutched tightly in his trembling hand. Next, Robert picked up his phone and dialed the number Emily had provided for the landlord, his mind already formulating a strategy. Hello? A gruff voice answered on the other end of the line. This is Robert Sullivan's attorney, Robert lied smoothly, his voice oozing with an authority he knew the man on the other end would recognize. I am representing Ms. Susan Miller regarding the property at 42 Oak Street. The line went silent, the man on the other end undoubtedly realizing the gravity of the situation. We are sending a building inspector to the unit today, Robert continued, his voice firm and unwavering. If he finds a single code violation, like say faulty wiring, we will be suing for endangerment. Unless, of course, you would like to release Ms. Miller from her lease immediately, return her deposit, and waive all back rent. The landlord grunted, a sound like rocks grinding together, and slammed the phone down. Robert slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. The battles against all odds were won. Now loomed the harder task, the delicate dance of peace negotiations. Susan drifted awake, the hazy afternoon light painting stripes across her bed. She blinked, disoriented, the fog of sleep clinging to her mind. Then, she saw them. Emily and Timmy, perched like watchful sparrows on chairs pushed against the wall, their eyes glued to the flickering images of a cartoon playing silently on a tablet. "Mom," Timmy breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He launched himself from the chair and into her arms, hugging her with a newfound tenderness. "Hey, baby," Susan croaked, her throat raspy. A strange weakness still lingered, but her head felt clearer than it had in days. She looked up, and there he was, Robert, filling the doorway, his presence radiating a quiet strength. "The doctor says you're going to live," Robert announced, stepping into the room, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "But you are grounded." Susan instinctively tried to push herself up, a wave of defiance washing over her. "Mr. Sullivan, the work, my shift, is covered," Robert interrupted gently. "Indefinitely. You are on paid medical leave." "I don't have paid medical leave," Susan said, her brow furrowed in confusion. "You do now. I had a chat with your management." Robert pulled a chair closer to the bed, his gaze unwavering. "Susan, we need to settle something. Last night you said your father was stubborn, that he wouldn't take a handout. And you are the same." "Ideally, yes," Susan interrupted, her pride, though wounded, still flaring even beneath the sterile hospital gown. "Good, because I am not offering a handout. I am paying a debt." Robert reached into his pocket and carefully extracted an old, worn photograph. It was faded black and white, creased right down the center from countless unfoldings. It depicted a group of soldiers crammed together on a tank, eating from dented tin cans. He pointed to a man in the middle, laughing, a cigarette tucked jauntily behind his ear. "That's my dad," Susan whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "That's Will." "And that," Robert said, his finger moving to a skinny, almost skeletal-looking boy huddled beside him, his eyes wide with fear, "is me." Susan peered closer. The boy in the photo bore almost no resemblance to the polished billionaire standing before her. He looked utterly lost, consumed by hunger and terror. "I was the youngest private in the squad," Robert said, his voice cracking with suppressed emotion. "I told the kids a story last night about a peach tin, about how Will always made sure the youngest ate first. That was me, Susan. He was the one who fed me." Tears welled in Robert's eyes, unchecked, unashamed. "Your father saved my life 3 times. Once during the bulge, once in the chaos of Berlin, and once when we got home and I couldn't find a job. He gave me $50 to buy a suit so I could go to an interview. That interview, that got me my start in shipping." Robert looked directly at Susan, his expression a raw plea. "Everything I have, the towers, the money, the cars, it all started with your father's $50. I tried to find him years ago to pay him back, but I looked for William Miller. Do you know how many William Millers are in the directory? Thousands. I never knew he had passed. I never knew he had a daughter." Susan was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. Emily, her eyes wide with understanding, squeezed Timmy's hand. "So you see," Robert said, leaning back slightly, his voice regaining its composure, "this isn't charity. This is a return on an investment. Your father invested in me when I was nothing. Now the investment has matured. I am simply paying the dividend to his shareholders. To you, to Emily, to Timmy." "A dividend?" Susan asked, a small, watery smile breaking through her tears. "A very large one?" Robert smiled back, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "I am setting up a trust for the children's education. And for you, I have a proposition. I need someone to manage the charitable arm of my company. Someone who knows what it's like to struggle. Someone who knows the value of $1 and a loaf of bread. I don't need a polished executive. I need a fighter. I need a Miller. Do you want to hire me? I want to partner with you. The salary is substantial. The hours are reasonable. And you will never scrub a floor again, unless you want to." Susan looked down at her hands that were perpetually red and rough from harsh chemicals and endless scrubbing. She glanced at Emily, who was nodding vigorously, her eyes shining with hope. She looked at Timmy, who just wanted his mom to be happy and healthy. "I don't know what to say," Susan whispered, overwhelmed. "Say yes, sir," Robert suggested gently, a twinkle in his eye. "Like a good soldier." "Yes, sir." Susan laughed, a real, full-throated laugh that filled the room with warmth. 6 months later, a freshly painted sign above the renovated brick building proudly declared, "The Iron Will Foundation." It was the same building where Susan and her children had once huddled in the damp, cheerless basement. Now, Robert Sullivan owned the entire property. The upper floors had been transformed into bright, affordable apartments for single mothers, a haven of hope and support. The ground floor housed a bustling community kitchen and resource center. On this particular Sunday morning, the line outside wasn't heavy with shame and despair, but rather light with chatter and anticipation. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting aroma of fresh vanilla and yeast, a symphony of baking happiness. Susan, radiating health and vitality, moved through the crowd with purpose, resplendent in a smart blazer. She checked her clipboard, directing a young mother to the back room where winter coats were being distributed, her smile brighter than it had ever been. At the serving counter, Emily was in charge, her posture straighter, her blonde hair neatly tied back. "Chocolate or vanilla?" Emily asked a shy little girl, her voice confident and kind. "Vanilla," the girl whispered, her eyes wide. "Good choice. It has a rocket ship on it," Emily said with a wink, handing over the decorated cupcake. Behind the counter, wearing a spotless white apron over his impeccably tailored charcoal suit, was Robert Sullivan himself. He was scooping potato salad with the same intense focus and dedication he once reserved for corporate board meetings, his face reflecting a joy that had never graced the cover of any business magazine. Timmy, a blur of youthful energy, darted between the tables, diligently filling water glasses, proudly sporting a t-shirt that proclaimed him junior captain. The cheerful chime of the bell above the door announced a new arrival. A young woman hesitantly walked in, cradling a baby in her arms. She looked exhausted, her clothes worn and thin, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. She lingered near the entrance, her gaze darting from the abundant food to the people milling about, and then she turned as if to leave. Robert, noticing her distress, immediately put down his spoon and walked out from behind the counter. "Excuse me, miss," he called out gently. The woman froze, her shoulders slumping. "I don't have a voucher. I made a mistake." "You don't need a voucher here," Robert said reassuringly, guiding her towards a warm, inviting table. "You just need an appetite. Is it a birthday?" The woman looked down at her baby, her eyes filled with a weariness that belied her youth. "No, just a Tuesday. A hard Tuesday. Those are the days that need cake the most," Robert said, his smile genuine and warm. "Sit down. My friend Susan will bring a high chair, and I will get you a hot meal." Almost instantly, Susan arrived with a steaming cup of coffee, and Emily followed close behind, carrying a beautifully decorated cupcake for the baby. The woman, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness, wiped a tear from her cheek. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why do you do this?" Robert turned and looked at the wall, at the place of honor where the Silver Star medal hung, displayed proudly next to the old, faded photograph of the soldiers on the tank. "Because nobody fights alone," Robert said softly, his voice filled with conviction. "Not anymore." Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, bathing the new sign of the Iron Will Foundation in its golden light. The billionaire, the maid, and the children had found something infinitely more valuable than all the money in the bank. They had found a family. And in saving them, Robert had come to realize they had saved him right back. And that's where we'll leave Robert and the family for now, proving that sometimes the smallest gifts can indeed matter the most. I hope this story of unexpected kindness gave you a chance to step out of your own daily rush and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe you were having a cup of tea or perhaps winding down after your own long day of work. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. If you want to make sure we cross paths again for more heartwarming tales, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our storytelling. So feel free to drop your feedback below.